Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the People's Poet Podcast, also known as Triple P. I'm your host, Tony Robles. Today, we have a very, very special guest, a poet. And given that this is the People's Poet Podcast, Triple P, believe it or not, this is the first time that I've had a poet on this podcast. I know, shame, shame, shame. You shouldn't do that, right? But we have a poeta. I believe in Tagalog, the word is makata. And of course, in English, it is just plain poet or somebody that writes a bunch of lines, right? But before we get to our very special guest, just want to let you know, please hit the subscribe button to this channel. We're trying to get the word out about Triple P, and leave a comment. If there's a guest that you would like us to have on our podcast, please let us know. Angela Narciso Torres is the author of this wonderful, wonderful chapbook. It's called To the Bone. And she's also the author of Blood Orange and What Happens Is Neither, and a winner of the 2019 Yeats Poetry Prize. And her recent work appears in Poetry, Missouri Review, and Pank, I believe it is, Pank. She's a graduate of Warren Wilson College, which is where I'm at in North Carolina here, the MFA program at Warren Wilson. Angela Narciso Torres, been wanting to meet you for such a long time. How you doing? Welcome to Triple P.
Thank you, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here. Really
Now,
an honor and pleasure. And may I correct, you have had a poet in your show. You're a poet, so there's that.
you know what? Yeah, I'm glad you told. I have to be reminded of that. And being a writer, I'm so glad that not only do I have you as a guest right now, but I also have your typewriter. So it's almost like we have three. We're going to be engaging. Now you're in California right now. You live in Oceanside, is that correct?
That's right.
But in reading your biography, you grew up in Manila, and you've been in transit. You've lived in a lot of different places.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about that, where you're from, and how how you got here, and then we'll kind of carry it on.
So my parents are Filipino, and I was actually born and raised by Filipino parents in Manila, but I was I was born in Brooklyn. My parents were sort of reverse immigrants. They came to New York in the 60s with a big wave of immigrants to fulfill their medical studies there. And then shortly after I was born, we moved back to Manila because they wanted to raise a family there. By then we were four siblings. And I grew up, went to school, finished college in Manila, and then came to the US for graduate studies. And what was supposed to be just a couple of years graduate study ended up being getting married, starting a family. And at some point my mom said, you know what, given the political situation, I had moved, I graduated from the Ateneo in 1987, and that was right after the revolution, the People's Power Revolution. So, and things were just really iffy. And mom said, since you were born in Brooklyn, you're a citizen, stay there, make a life there, and you will have better opportunities there, and your kids will too. So that's what we did. And since then, we've lived first in Austin, Texas. From there, we moved to California, where we raised our kids. And then we lived in Chicago for 10 years when the kids were kind of school age. And now we're back in California, which is great. We did spend a year or two in Florida, and that was an experience.
Mhm.
It reminded me a lot of the Philippines, actually. I loved my time there.
Where's this again? You said in Austin, or
No, Florida was very much like
oh,
the
Florida,
Philippines.
right,
The,
the
the,
tropic. Okay.
the tropics, yeah, the tropical zone. That was our last home, and now we're back in California, but Southern California this time.
Um, yeah, that's interesting. So you were actually born in Brooklyn, and then you guys went back to the Philippines, and
Yeah,
then
yeah. So my parents are reverse immigrants.
it's funny because when I think of Brooklyn, I think of gentrification, and I think of all those things that are happening there, but all of the rich culture. Philip Lopate wrote I don't know if you read his essay called Brooklyn the Unknowable, but
I have
it's a real beautiful essay about just the just the nuances and the specificity of what it means to be from Brooklyn in relation to Manhattan, and it's just a great, I guess you'd call it an essay. Now, your mother was a medical student in Brooklyn, and there's a poem that you have in To the Bone. It's called Immigrant Visits Her Mother, and she's
Mhm,
sitting in the Brooklyn diner, right? She's
mhm,
sitting, I
mhm.
guess, when she's finally getting a break. Philip Lopate talks about Brooklyn, the unknowable. How did your mother, what was her transition like in terms of being in Brooklyn,
Mhm.
and what were some of the challenges, and how did she get by, and you know,
Oh yeah, she has a lot of stories. So my mom and dad moved there after graduating from medical school at UST, University of Santo Tomas. I guess there was an opportunity to do your residency abroad, and they took that opportunity. And my mom actually was one of the few female residents in the Jewish hospital in Brooklyn, maybe the only one on her floor, and then an Asian at that. So actually, she came out in the newspaper once to just because they were highlighting that here's a woman from the Philippines. She's one of our best residents, and she did not know what to specialize in at the time. She was aiming for pediatrics when she was in Manila, but when she got to Brooklyn, the only opening for her was hematology. So she actually became a specialist in hematology, which is of course treatment of blood diseases,
blood
and that became
diseases?
her
Okay.
specialty. Mhm. Yeah, that became her specialty. She talks about, and then she of course had my brother and then me, and so carrying on like pregnant, having a baby in the U.S. far from home, it was challenging. They lived in not a very good part of Brooklyn. It's where the Dodgers used to play, Ebbets Field, right next to there. And they would take the subway, all very new to them. And she missed Filipino food so much, I didn't know where to get it. So she told me she would buy Campbell's soup, and that was the closest thing that like to like home food that she could find. Eventually, her mom and dad came to help take care of the babies while they were at work. So that was helpful. And like anyone else living in New York, I feel like because they feel they kind of was able to tame the city and it became theirs. They both loved their time there. They were there for 7 years, and they were both medical residents doing really like kind of crazy shifts, graveyard shifts. So and then raising three young kids, and then I came along in their 6th year there, and after that they went home to
What was your
Manila.
father's specialty? You said that he was a medical professional. What was his specialty?
His specialty was pathology, and so that's the study of just like he would mostly be at the microscope looking through to see if the cells were benign or malignant, to
Mm,
just like the nature of the disease or the pathology. So
right.
mostly clinical work, and because he
Mm.
was an introvert like me and very kind of not gregarious and not really the type to socialize with a lot of people, he didn't have to meet any patients. He was either in front of a microscope or working on an autopsy, which is rather grim, but he really enjoyed it and he did very well in his field.
Yeah, there's a little similarity with you and Grace to Lusan in that respect, because when her parents came over, they were both medical professionals, and I think her father was an optometrist. He worked in the prison, and the
Mm.
mother, her Grace's mother, had one other specialty, but she ended up there were no opportunities in her specialty, so she ended up working in a lab and becoming a
Oh,
professional in um, a whole other capacity. Um,
wow, that's really
I
cool.
I guess you know given given the fact that your parents were both medical professionals, we're looking at an internal landscape, the landscape of the body, and the
Mhm.
specificities that go with that, where we
Yeah,
become excavators, where we go deep. And in this
cool.
sense, in the sense of poetry, we uh, we do the same thing. Um, I want to bring up something, and I want you to elaborate on this. You had spoken about your aunt, and she had told you that you know if you swallow a seed, a tree will grow inside your stomach. Tell us about that, because that's internal. You're taking that in physically, but metaphorically, there's a lot of different ramifications and a lot of different ideas that spring from that. Talk about that.
Okay, so that aunt is on my mom's side, my maternal aunt, the sister of my mother. And what's really interesting is that although my mother was a medical professional, she never really lost hold of those superstitions that she grew up with. Like If you sleep with your hair wet, you'll go blind, things like that. And these are just terrifying things for a child to hear. One of the poems in the book is "If You Go to Bed Hungry," the first poem in the book, and it's all of those things. It's all those folklore, words of wisdom from they call old wives' tales. But for me, and then the thing about the seed, if you swallow a seed, and the seed in question was the santol seed. I don't know if you ever tried the fruit santol. It's
No.
very sour and it has big, big seeds, and you
How,
dip it in
is that spelled?
Santol, Santol.
Santol. Okay.
Santol, yeah. So fruits were a big thing in our family because my titas had a lot of fruit trees where in the house where they grew up, and santol is just so. I guess it's a perfect umami. It's sweet, it's sour. You dip it in rock salt, you eat it, and then you can't really separate the flesh from the bone, the seed. So sometimes you end up swallowing the whole thing because it's just so delicious. You forget to spit it out. And
Yeah.
yeah. And then of course that causes a lot of problems if you're a little kid and you have a bunch of big seeds in your stomach. So I
Mhm.
think that's part of why my tita said that is like be very careful because if you swallow it, you'll have a tree growing in your stomach. And of
Can,
course that terrified us
can you
as
read
kids.
that poem for us?
Sure, sure, I'd be happy to.
And this is the poem, "If You Go to Bed Hungry," from To the Bone. And this is the
Oh,
chap book,
oh,
right?
yes. Oh, so you want if you go? I thought you wanted the one with the seed, but this is I'd love to read this one
Either
too.
one, but yeah, whichever one you choose.
Okay, we can start with if you go to bed hungry. If you go to bed hungry. If you go to bed hungry, your soul will get up and steal cold rice from the pot. Stop playing with fire before the moon rises, or you'll pee in your sleep. Sweeping the floor after dark sweeps wealth and good fortune out the door. Fork drop, a gentleman will visit. Spoon, a bashful lady. Bathing after you've cooked over a hot stove makes the veins swell. For safe passage to the guest who leaves mid-meal, turn your plate. The adage goes, coffee stunts growth. 12 grapes on New Year's, the opposite. Advice from the learned, book under your pillow. Never step on, never drop. Every rice grain that remains on your plate, you'll meet again on the footpath to heaven. You'll have to stoop to pick up each one.
It's a beautiful poem. There's a lot of metaphor with that. Every rice grain that remains on your plate will meet again on the footpath to heaven. You'll have to stoop to pick each one. So I'm assuming you can also say that about poetry. The poetry is kind of like the rice grains, and on the footpath to heaven could be the footpath in knowing yourself. Because I mean, this is rife with a lot of I don't want to say superstition, but with um, a lot of knowledge and a lot of things that are
Mhm.
passed on about how we make sense of the world. You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and the sense that it seems based on it seems otherworldly. It doesn't go by the logic of what we know of natural law or science, which I find so fascinating. Like there's another set of rules governing how we think and how we should act and even the moral choices that we make. And I feel that as a child, when you hear those things, it makes you start to think, okay, there's another world beneath this one. There has to be something else out there and other forces guiding our lives and what's happening to us. It's fascinating and scary and exciting and also terrifying in a way. I mean, these were the stuff of our nightmares. And, my cousins